flotilla fallout, a former Israeli ambassador to Turkey says the two countries' relationship will be damaged following Israel's raid on an aid ship. Working together, the Russian president and European leaders discussed boosting trade and economic cooperation at a summit in southern Russia. Tough talk. U.S. President Barack Obama says if laws were broken in the devastating Gulf of Mexico oil spill, those responsible will be brought to justice. And eco-friendly, China's central government subsidizes car makers' production costs to build clean and green energy cars. Good morning and welcome to this CCTV News Update. I'm Li Dongning in Beijing. Well, first of all, the Japanese Prime Minister Hatoyama is going to resign, according to the Japan's public broadcaster NHK. The reported decision comes as pressure continues to mount in Hatoyama's Democratic Party of Japan for him to step down just 8 months into the top job. And Hatoyama was the great hope to revive his party's chances in an upper house election expected on July the 11th. A win could allow the party to introduce policies much easier. The Israeli raid on the flotilla of ships carrying aid and hundreds of pro-Palestinian activists in the early hours of Monday killed 10 people. Israel, however, insists its forces fired in self-defense. Israel has released a black and white video showing its commandos being beaten up by activists as well as weapons found aboard the ship. And Israel says it opened fire after the commandos were attacked by knives, clubs and light fire from 2 pistols wrestled from soldiers who landed on one of the vessels from a helicopter. But activists returning to Europe after the attack said the commandos beat passengers and used electric shocks during the assault. A German doctor who was on board the ship said he saw 4 activists who died of gunshot wounds. Meanwhile, a former Israeli says there will almost certainly be damage to the bilateral relationship following the Israeli raid on the Gaza aid convoy. Meanwhile, Turkey's Prime Minister has reacted angrily to the violent interception of the Turkish-led flotilla. Pei Jian reports.
Turkey withdrew its ambassador to Israel immediately after the raid and scrapped 3 joint military exercises. It also called the United Nations Security Council for an emergency meeting, demanding an impartial investigation.
Once more, we curse this inhumane attack on the ferries which were carrying babies, women, priests and imams. I explained it in Chile and I am underlining it here again. This bloody massacre by Israel on ships that were taking humanitarian aid to Gaza deserves every kind of curse. This attack was obviously an attack on international law, the conscience of humanity and world peace.
Speaking in Jerusalem on Tuesday, Israeli Deputy Foreign Minister Danny Ayalon stressed that Israel will try and plead with everybody, including the Turkish government, to stop the so-called charity activity. Former Israeli ambassador to Turkey also expressed his view on bilateral ties.
They already called the Turkish ambassador back to Ankara. I hope very much that this incident will not lead to breaking the diplomatic link. This link is existing 61 years without interruption, and it'll be a very severe blow to Israel's international standing if this link will be broken.
Analysts say there are signs, however, that the long-term strategic partnership between Israel and Turkey will endure. Pei Jian, CCTV.
China is urging Israel to remove the blockade in Gaza as soon as possible so the Middle East peace process will not suffer further setbacks. On Monday, Israeli forces attacked an international flotilla carrying aid to besieged Gaza, killing at least 10 and wounding more than 30 others. The clash happened after Israeli soldiers tried to stop the boats from reaching Gaza. The flotilla, consisting of 6 ships, was carrying about 10,000 tons of aid, and activists who were making an attempt to break the blockade in Gaza. And Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Ma Zhaoxu says the situation in the Middle East is at a crucial stage. Meanwhile, the UN Security Council is also condemning the Israeli acts that caused civilian deaths during the operation against a number of aid ships bound for Gaza. Mike Patterson reports.
The UN Security Council is calling for an impartial investigation of the attack and condemning the acts that resulted in the loss of at least 10 lives. The Council is also requesting the immediate release of the ships as well as the civilians held by Israel.
We believe that an impartial investigation has to deal with all the issues that are involved in this incident, all of the acts of violence that have created these deadly incidents.
The act, supported by Turkey, would imply that Israel alone was responsible for the deaths, while acts suggests the activists, who Israel say attacked its commandos, also bear some responsibility.
I listened to the explanation of the President of the Security Council, the Ambassador of Mexico, and we believe that his interpretation is the interpretation that the majority of the members of the Security Council would like to advance.
Monday, Israeli Marines stormed a Turkish aid ship bound for Gaza and detained roughly 700 people on board. According to a senior Israeli officer, most of those who died in the incident were Turks. Mike Patterson, CCTV.
The Russian president and European Union leaders have discussed boosting trade and economic cooperation at a summit in the southern Russian city of Rostov-on-Don. And top of the agenda at the two-day talks was the launch of a new partnership for modernization. And the EU will provide technology, training and investment in turn for reforms to boost democracy, to make Russia's economy more open. Russian President Dmitry Medvedev said European technology is needed to wean the economy off its reliance on energy exports. And the EU is also hoping to boost trade with Russia, as EU exports to Russia fell sharply during the financial crisis. A declaration condemning Israel's attack on the Gaza-bound aid flotilla was also among the issues discussed. And Poland has published cockpit conversations of the April plane crash that killed its president. The review, the pilots decided to land in heavy fog despite warnings from the Russian aviation authorities. The plane's onboard warning system told the pilots numerous times to pull up, terrain ahead just before the crash. And when the plane's wing clipped a tree, causing it to flip and crash, the pilots screamed and cursed. And that was the last information recorded on the black boxes, which then fell silent. And Polish and Russian investigators have not yet drawn final conclusions about what caused the crash that killed President Lech Kaczynski and 95 others, including many top civilian and military leaders. But evidence so far points to pilot error and bad weather conditions. You've been watching CCTV News live from the Chinese capital. Still ahead in the program. Opposition outcry. Egypt's opposition parties and human rights groups allege widespread government fraud in recent elections.
We have an obligation to
and tough talk. U.S. President Barack Obama says if laws were broken in the devastating Gulf of Mexico oil spill, those responsible will be brought to justice. Hello again. Egypt's opposition parties and human rights groups have alleged widespread government fraud in the elections for Egypt's upper house of parliament. And they say many Egyptians have been blocked by security forces and ruling party backers from casting votes, particularly in areas where the opposition Muslim Brotherhood is standing. And the vote is seen as a litmus test for how much space the authorities will give opposition voices in the parliamentary vote this year and presidential election in 2011. And the official election body said voting for the council, dominated by President Hosni Mubarak's National Democratic Party, was smooth and complaints are being dealt with swiftly. The results of the polls are expected to be announced on Wednesday. Well, BP faces a critical moment as the Gulf of Mexico oil leak is now considered the worst ever in the United States. Up to 19,000 barrels are leaking into the ocean each day. The total cost of the cleanup now stands at nearly $1 billion. And this report comes from Reuters.
BP's share price fell by up to 15% after the top kill bid to stem the US oil leak failed. The oil giant has been attempting to plug the massive spill since their Deepwater Horizon rig exploded off the Louisiana coast 6 weeks ago. The financial cost of tackling the worst spill in US history has so far totaled $990 million. Columnist for Reuters Breaking Views, Neil Collins, says that number, though daunting, is not what is spooking investors.
No, I think that's a trivial sum in comparison to the likely cost of the cleanup and the cost of restitution, which will certainly run into many billions of dollars, probably tens of billions of dollars. I think the really new factor is the realization that there is no certainty that this well can be capped at all.
BP shares have lost a third of their value since the spill started in the Gulf of Mexico, a wipeout of about £43 billion in market capitalisation. Collins says it would be politically prudent of BP to suspend all dividends until the catastrophe is resolved.
The political damage is probably just as great as the environmental damage here. The damage to BP's reputation in America, the United States is its biggest market, is very substantial here, and anything they can do to regain some of the political initiative, they should do.
US President Barack Obama is meeting a panel he created to probe the spill. Scientists estimate the gushing well is now leaking between 12,000 and 19,000 barrels of oil per day. BP is now preparing a new and untested plan to use a dome to funnel oil from the site a mile beneath the sea to a tanker on the surface.
Meanwhile, US President Barack Obama has vowed that if laws are broken in the devastating Gulf of Mexico oil spill, those responsible will be brought to justice. Meanwhile, BP is to try yet another method to stop the flow. Yang Wei-han reports.
The U.S. president urged the leaders of an independent commission investigating the Gulf oil spill to thoroughly examine the disaster in order to prevent it from happening again. Obama told the commission to report back in 6 months. The president says the government is ready to step up its response and prosecute if any laws have been broken.
We have an obligation to investigate what went wrong and to determine what reforms are needed so that we never have to experience a crisis like this again. If the laws on our books are insufficient to prevent such a spill, the laws must change. If oversight was inadequate to enforce these laws, oversight has to be reformed. If our laws were broken, leading to this death and destruction, my solemn pledge is that we will bring those responsible to justice on behalf of the victims of this catastrophe and the people of the Gulf region.
Meanwhile, BP will try again to put a cap on the leaking well so oil can be siphoned to the surface.
Today, the operation is to make the cuts on the riser, and then over the next 24 to 48 hours, we'll be installing the cap and beginning production, and hopefully getting down to a very small amount of oil leaking. But that's what's supposed to occur today.
The government estimates that between 20 million and 43 million gallons of crude have poured into the Gulf, affecting beaches, wildlife and the local economy. It is now the worst spill in U.S. history. Yang Wei-han, CCTV.
Turning to other news, the jobless rate in the 16-nation Eurozone hit 10.1% in April, the worst since 1998. It's estimated more than 15 million people in the region are looking for work.
The number of people out of work in the 16-country Eurozone hit over 10% in April, its highest level in nearly 12 years. More than 15 million people are now registered unemployed. Spain, Portugal and Cyprus are among those countries showing the biggest rise, with Spain's unemployment close to 20%. Further signs that a global recovery may be some time away was evident in the latest manufacturing data. The market Eurozone Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index sank more than 1.5%. Britain and Ireland managed to buck the trend. In the UK, the index held steady at April's 15-year highs, and Ireland's output also improved in May to its highest level in almost 3 years. Some experts say although the number of new jobs created in Ireland may be small, it's still a positive sign for Europe's longest